Dorian stood on the porch long after the black car disappeared down the dusty road. The night air had turned colder, but he didn't seem to notice. The little girl in his arms, Eloan, clung to his shirt, her small fingers trembling. Inside the house, the sound of quiet sobbing filled the rooms. He finally stepped back inside. 5 pairs of tearful eyes looked up at him. Arden, the oldest, tried to be strong, but her face was pale. Kaylani, Brielle, Sable, and Taryn huddled together on the worn couch as if they could protect each other from what had just happened. No one asked where their mother went. They already knew. Dorian gently set Eloan down and knelt in front of his daughters. His heart felt heavy, but he forced a calm expression. "Listen to me," he said softly. "We still have each other." The house was small and quiet, and the future suddenly looked frightening. Bills were stacked on the kitchen table. The refrigerator was nearly empty. The responsibility of 6 young lives now rested completely on his shoulders. For a moment, the weight of it almost crushed him. But when he looked into his daughter's scared faces, something inside him hardened with determination. No matter how hard life became, he would not let them feel abandoned again. The days that followed were harder than anything Dorian had ever faced. Each morning he woke before sunrise, quietly getting dressed so he would not wake the girls too early. He made simple breakfasts, sometimes just toast and eggs, before walking them to school. After that he hurried to the auto shop where he worked as a mechanic, spending long hours fixing engines and changing oil. When the evening came, he didn't go home to rest. Instead, he cleaned offices and hallways at a small factory across town. The work was tiring, but he kept going because 6 young girls depended on him. Weekends were not for relaxing either. Farmers in nearby fields often called him to repair broken tractors and equipment. The extra money helped keep food on the table. At home, the girls slowly learned to take care of each other. Arden helped the younger ones with homework. Kaylani cooked simple meals. Brielle tried to make everyone laugh when the house felt too quiet. But some nights, one of them would sit beside their father and ask the same painful question. Dorian would pause for a moment before answering gently. He never allowed bitterness into his voice. Yet when the house finally fell silent and the girls were asleep, he often sat alone at the kitchen table, carrying a sadness he never showed them. Winter was the hardest season for the Hale family. Cold air slipped through the thin windows of their old house, and the heater often stopped working. The girls slept under extra blankets while the wind rattled the walls outside. Money was always tight. Dorian carefully counted every dollar before buying groceries. Some evenings the kitchen table held only a small pot of soup and a few slices of bread. Still, he always made sure his daughters ate before he did. School was not easy for the girls either. Other children noticed their old clothes and worn shoes. Whispers followed them in the hallways. Sometimes the words were loud enough to hurt. Arden heard it all. She saw the way her younger sisters lowered their heads and stayed quiet. One afternoon she walked home with anger building inside her chest. She knew their life was hard, but she refused to believe this was all their future would be. That night the sisters gathered in their small bedroom. Arden looked at each of them carefully. Her voice was calm but strong as she spoke about a different future, one where they would stand tall and no one would look down on them again. Her words filled the room with a new kind of determination. After that night, the sisters began to treat their promise seriously. They wrote their goals on a piece of paper and taped it to the bedroom wall. It was a simple reminder that their future would be different from their past. Each day after school, they gathered around the small kitchen table to study together. The house was often quiet except for the sound of pages turning and pencils moving across notebooks. Arden focused on math and science with intense concentration, determined to understand every problem in front of her. Kaylani spent hours reading books about the human body, fascinated by how doctors saved lives. Brielle liked to watch court programs on the old television, paying attention to how lawyers argued and defended people. Sable carefully observed how local store owners ran their businesses whenever she walked through town. Taryn enjoyed drawing buildings and houses in her sketchbook, imagining better places for families to live. Eloan, the youngest, loved taking apart old radios and small machines just to see how they worked. Dorian noticed the quiet change in his daughters. The sadness that once filled the house slowly turned into focus and determination. Even when life stayed difficult, the sisters kept moving forward, believing that their hard work would one day open doors the world once closed to them. The phone call came on a quiet afternoon. Arden was studying in the small library at school when a neighbor rushed in and told her that something had happened to her father. Her heart began to race as she ran outside and hurried toward the hospital. Her sisters were already there, sitting together in the waiting area with worried faces. A doctor soon explained that Dorian had collapsed while working and that his body had been pushed too far for too many years. Hearing those words made the girls realize how much their father had sacrificed for them. When they were finally allowed to see him, Dorian looked weak and tired in the hospital bed. His hands, once strong from years of work, now rested quietly on the blanket. The sisters gathered around him, trying to stay calm. He looked at them with regret in his eyes. Arden gently squeezed his hand and assured him that everything he had done mattered more than he knew. After that day, the sisters understood that time was precious. They became even more focused on their studies and responsibilities. Every late night of work and learning now carried a deeper purpose. They were determined to build a future that honored the man who had given his entire life to them. The years passed slowly, filled with effort and patience. Each sister followed the path she had chosen long ago. Life was not easy in the beginning. College brought new struggles, long hours, and moments of doubt. There were times when money was tight again, but the sisters helped each other whenever one of them needed support. Step by step, their hard work began to open doors. Opportunities appeared through scholarships, internships, and the respect they earned from teachers and mentors. They never forgot where they came from, and that memory kept them focused. As their careers grew, their lives changed in ways they once could not imagine. They moved to different cities, built professional reputations, and slowly gained success in their fields. Yet the bond between them remained strong. They spoke often and met whenever they could, always reminding each other of the promise they made years earlier. One of their proudest moments came when they decided to return to their hometown. Together they repaired the old house where they had grown up. The broken walls were fixed, the roof replaced, and the rooms filled with warmth again. Dorian spent his days sitting on the porch, watching the quiet street and feeling grateful for the daughters who had turned struggle into strength. The town had changed over the years, but some memories still lived in its quiet streets. When Celine stepped off the bus, she looked around slowly, almost as if she expected no one to recognize her. Time had taken away the confidence she once carried. Her clothes were simple now, and the proud expression she used to wear had faded. She walked through the town carefully, noticing new buildings and businesses that had appeared over the years. At a small cafe, she overheard two people talking about a group of successful women who had grown up there. Their last name caught her attention immediately. Curiosity pulled her closer as she listened. The conversation described impressive careers and achievements. Each name sounded familiar to her, though she had not spoken them in many years. For a moment she felt disbelief. She remembered 6 small girls in a poor house, crying as she walked away. Now those same daughters were respected and admired. The thought stayed in her mind as she continued walking through the town. Part of her felt uneasy, but another part felt drawn toward the people she had once left behind. After all these years, she finally decided it was time to see them again and face whatever waited for her. Celine was led into a large meeting room inside the building. The space was quiet and professional, with a long table in the center. As she stepped inside, she saw 6 women already seated across from her. For a moment she hesitated. They looked confident and calm, nothing like the frightened children she remembered. Their expressions were serious as they watched her walk in. The silence in the room felt heavy. Celine slowly sat down in the chair placed on the opposite side of the table. She tried to hold on to her composure, but the situation felt different from what she had imagined. The women in front of her were strangers in many ways, yet their faces carried pieces of the girls she once knew. She began speaking, her voice softer than expected. She talked about the years that had passed and the mistakes she believed she had made. Her words came slowly as she tried to find the right way to explain herself. The sisters listened without interrupting. Their faces remained calm and steady. They had already lived through the pain and confusion many years earlier. Now they were simply hearing the words of someone who had returned too late to change the past. The room stayed quiet after Celine finished speaking. She waited for shouting or harsh words, but none came. The sisters looked at her calmly, as if they were listening to a distant memory rather than a person who had once been part of their lives. Arden slowly stood from her chair. Her voice was steady and respectful, but there was a clear distance in her tone. She spoke about the man who had stayed when life was hardest. The one who worked every day and never turned away from his children. Kehlani then spoke briefly, reminding everyone that strength sometimes comes from the person who refuses to leave when things become difficult. Her words were simple, but they carried years of truth behind them. Brielle reached into a folder and placed a document on the table. Celine looked down at the papers with confusion. It explained a project created by the sisters, built to help children who had experienced abandonment and hardship. The sisters described how the organization supported families and provided opportunities for young people who felt forgotten. As Celine listened, she began to understand something painful. The daughters she once left behind had built something meaningful from their struggles, turning their past into a source of help for others. Celine walked out of the building slowly. The hallway felt long and quiet as she made her way to the exit. When the doors closed behind her, she paused for a moment on the sidewalk. The world around her continued as normal, but inside she felt a heavy realization. The daughters she had once believed would hold her back had grown into strong and accomplished women. They had built lives full of purpose and respect. Yet none of their success included her. She understood something clearly now. They were not angry. They were not seeking revenge. They had simply moved forward without her. Later that evening, the sisters gathered at the house where they had grown up. The place looked warm and peaceful, filled with light and quiet laughter. Their father sat with them, listening as they talked and shared memories. For him, seeing his daughters together like this meant everything. The years of struggle, sacrifice, and hard work had led to this moment. Around the table, there was a feeling of calm that had not existed in the past. The difficult years were behind them, and what remained was a family that had survived hardship and built something meaningful together through patience, loyalty, and strength.